several years. She's now an assistant professor at the University of Texas Arlington and has been doing lots of very creative things that she will tell you about. So, welcome back.
My name is Hye-Sun. Pleasure to be here. First of all, thank you, Professor Clark, for inviting me. I feel like I'm at home. I've lived in Chicago for about 15 years before I moved to Texas. So Chicago is definitely always home. So today I will talk about some of my research that I did during PhD and recently. So it's about Bohemia Cafe and the cultural placemaking. The very first question that I had was what makes a community walkable and lively? Some of you might have heard of the Jane Jacobs theory of lines on the street. She talked about 5 elements. Communities need to have high density of housing and the building forms. There should be a mixed building and land use, which creates more diversity of users. There should be a presence of old housing, not just the new apartments. Also, she said sidewalk should be the heart of the city and the center of main activities. And lastly, she said blocks should be short so that there is more choice of modes and the transportation. So, using that question, my hypothesis was how the culture and the build formulate to walking, biking, and public transit use. A lot of past research have been focused on the role of built environment, on the mood choice and transportation. However, they didn't do any research on the cultural form, which is the way of life, values, or the taste of people. So what is the relationship between cultural environment and commuting and transportation? So I use Bohemia as a culture form. Originally, it refers to a cultural concept that emerged in 19th century Paris. It was describing musical, artistic, and literary pursuits, and also nomad's lifestyle. They are often anti-establishment, and they are voluntarily publicly and described in many impressionist paintings like Henri Toulouse-Lautrec and Baudelaire's life in Latin Quarter in Paris. So I see Bohemia is not just artistic lifestyle, but it could be measurable across the cities and across different countries. So in the last 20 years, many sociologists, they have revisited Bohemian culture in economic perspective. Florida developed the first Bohemian index based on the total number of artists, which was later updated by Professor Clark and then Silver's book Scenescape with more finer categories of the dimensions. David Brooks talked about Bobos, which is a point term between Bohemian and capitalism. Richard Lloyd did a case study on Eco Park in Chicago and how they merged with a sense of art and commerce simultaneously. So I redefined and measured Bohemia with 5 elements. First, like 19th century Paris, they are still involved in art and music industry. Also, they have more non-hierarchical, democratic, egalitarian attitude, and they also participate in social movements like critical mass cycling activities started in San Francisco. Also, they tend to wear more unconventional clothing style, which is more common in the West and East, like tattoos and piercing. And the Bohemians are more tolerant to diversity, like LGBT, ethnic diversity, and also the lower income groups. Also, Bohemians are often in the creative industry, like startup companies or entrepreneurship. So statistically, Bohemia is correlated with cafes, nightclub, used bookstore, tattoo parlor, and arts amenities. So what is the relationship between Bohemians and walkable mode of transportation? First, they are inherently flaneur, which means a stroller in English. So they like to explore on the street, and they keep walking and get motivated by other people. So they always choose to live in an urban area because they can see more audience who they can challenge. Also, they tend to have a counterculture. So like Bohemians are always against to kind of conventional norms. Walking could be a non-conventional mode of transit as opposed to driving culture. Also, Bohemians can have more sense of environmentalism, and they care more about the impact on the human and natural habitats. So in method, I adopted theory and data of Scienscape, which you might heard in class. So we have two main data sources, Yellow Pages and Visit. So Visit is a zip code business pattern from US Census. And similar data set is also in France, Korea, Japan, China, and Canada. So we have international data set based on this method. So we codified hundreds of different amenities, like you see in the list here. It's just example of just some of the whole list of amenities. And then we codified these amenities into 15 sense dimensions under three main dimensions of legitimacy, theatricality, and authenticity. So using that calculation, each zip code has own score 15 dimensions, sense dimensions. So this shows how transgression score is measured based on the types of amenities and the count of amenities. So in Scienscape book, there are several ideotypical scenes, and Bohemian scene is one of them. So using 15 scenes dimensions, Bohemian ideal scene sets self-expression and transgression as the highest score. And the Blaze point measures the distance between this ideal score and the actual 15 scenes dimension score. So when you reverse the score, it measures how it's close to the ideal Bohemian score. So using that calculation, I compared Chicago, Paris, and Seoul. This shows the Bohemian score and range of three cities. So as you can see in the chart, Chicago has higher and narrower range of Bohemian score, whereas Paris and Seoul have about similar median score. However, Paris has larger contrast between low and high score. So using GIS map, I created this Bohemian scene map broken down to zip code. And also I created this non-order commuting choice with CTAL ridership overlaid. So as you can see here, highly Bohemian neighborhoods are more clustered in the north or west side of the city. Like Lakeview, well known for the largest LGBT community in the city. Wicker Park and Logan Square area in the west side of the city, which has a lot of small-scale art galleries, tech hubs, and street murals. So even though downtown has more concentration of higher transit ridership and higher alternative transit commuting, these Bohemian neighborhoods are also related to alternative commuting, especially the bicycle, choice of the bicycle. And in the same method, I created a Bohemian map and transportation map for Paris. So there is more overlap between these two than in Chicago. So Highly Bohemians are near 11th district, 18th district near Montmartre, 20th near Belleville. So 11th, there are a lot of music clubs and nightclubs converted from abandoned warehouses and factories near the canal. 18th is known for the Montmartre. Even though it's been gentrified, there are still a lot of street artists in Place du Tertre, and Belleville is actually one of two Chinatowns in Paris. They have a lot of immigrants, not just Chinese population, but also from Africa and Europe. And they, the Bohemians earlier migrate to Belleville from Montmartre. So Belleville is considered to be a newer Bohemian area in Paris. So as you can see, these Bohemian neighborhoods also have highest transit ridership and as well as green community choice. In Seoul, so I did not show the river, but there is a river here. And South River is called Gangnam area, which is actually a affluent area. So in the Bohemian map, Gangnam is shown as also highly Bohemian because of the large arts institutions and art center. More independent artists are found near the university campus in north of Han River. Like Korea University, which is traditionally known for the art and architecture major. And also Jongno has been a capital and the center of the city for more than 600 years. And there are a lot of traditional Korean houses now converted to art galleries, tea houses, and more contemporary uses. So between these two maps, we can find that these Hongik University area and Jongno, they have more green transportation and commuting. So using this and extending this to larger sample size, I tested regressions with these variables, density, diversity, as well as cultural variables. And regressing on walking, bicycling, transit, and rail ridership at the metro level. So these three variables were tested at the national level, which has 42,000 zip code in the whole US, 37,000 communes in France, 424 dorms in Seoul, and as well as 250 booths. So the result was that I did not show the table here, but I summarized. In all three countries, walking and public transit are associated with retail density. So usually where there is more number of retails, there is more tendency of walking and public transit. In US and France, Bohemians are likely to commute by bicycle, which was most interesting finding. Bohemia for walking is negative in the whole US, but positive in France. Later I'll explain more, but that was the result for the whole US. In Korea, artistic neighborhoods with old buildings have more walking, which was a slightly different result from the US. In metro area of Chicago, Paris, and Seoul, arts or Bohemian amenities find more metro ridership as well. So I was curious about what is city level difference, local difference in the US, and why Bohemians are negative in walking. So I checked 5 largest metro statistical areas as well as Nashville. So this shows the Bohemian score of these 6 cities. As you can see, LA, Chicago, New York have higher Bohemian score, whereas Nashville, Houston, and Phoenix have a lower Bohemian score. And even though LA has higher Bohemian score, in terms of alternative transportation, which is walking, biking, and transit, LA is relatively low because we know the city is more driving culture. And New York, there's no doubt for the city that has the most walkable mode of transportation, Philadelphia, as well as the Chicago. So I tested a similar and same regression for these 6 metro areas, and I found that in Houston, Bohemian arts are more significant factors of non-autonomous than density. Which is interesting result. In New York and Chicago, Bohemia strongly credits bicycle commute, same as the whole US. And while Bohemia is negative on walking, it has significantly positive effect on walking in LA only. So let's look at why LA is an outlier. So I looked into the LA and I was wondering what makes LA different from other cities, and I was paying attention to this art district in the city, which started in 1980s until now. So city passed a new labor work ordinance for the artists, and they converted former warehouses into this studio type of housing. It's called Artist in Residency Program. So what's happening here statistically is that Hollywood, while the Hollywood area has the largest percentage of the artists, for sure, the second largest artist area is here, Art District in downtown. They actually have the highest walking commute in the city after Santa Catalina Island, and it's an island, so walking is the only way to get around. So after this island, in the mainland, inland part, this district, art district, has the highest walking percentage. So there is kind of relationship between the art and walking in LA, in more driving and art-centric environment. So there was a finding, and recently I moved on to more specific amenity, which is cafe. So cafe is one of the third places and public sphere discussed in many different literatures. So Habermas said coffee house in 17th to 18th century London was a base of social political gatherings that fueled more democratic conversations in a hierarchical society. So as you can see, they are not just drinking coffee, they are actively engaging in discussion regardless of class. Also, cafe provided a street life for Plano. So they, those strollers, they sit in the cafe and they watch people, and they get some ideas for their writings and paintings. So that was also a tradition in Paris in the 19th century. Cafes, cabarets, and music halls, especially in the Latin Quarter near the university and Montmartre in 18th, were major social places for artists and writers. So Oldenburg later defined the third place, which means social place for the socializing. So homes are basically the first place, workplaces are the second place, and all other social gathering places are the third places. So in his book, Great Good Places, he described how these third places are critical to create and enhance the sense of community and develop more local economy. So using that concept, I checked the data from US Census and compared the change of the number in these different types of third places. And what's interesting here is that cafe, which is non-alcoholic beverages in US Census term, has been increasing dramatically, and as well as breweries. Bars, conventional bars have dropped down. So, while bars going down, breweries going up. So there is, question that breweries have more intimacy and more, like close relationship between producer and customer, compared to the old traditional bars. So customers might like to have more direct relationship with sellers. So that's what I suppose. Also, bookstore have dropped. I suppose that's because of the online bookstore like Amazon, you can order anything. So that is the change over the last 10 years. And this is more focused on drinking-based amenities. So the bars basically show the cafes between 2002 and 2012. And this line shows the alcoholic beverages, which is bar. So as you can see, cafes have gone up, bars dropped down. So this shows the change of the pace and change of the choice of the consumption in the United States. And I was wondering what is around the cafes. So I checked correlation between cafe and other types of amenities. So cafes tend to be in the same zip code with bakeries, bookstore, health club, commercial arts, and other arts related amenities, as well as bookstore. Also, this shows the city difference at the metro area level. So in New York, cafes are pretty much mixed with most of other amenities on the street. So as you see here, sidewalk restaurant is positively and positively significantly correlated with cafes in Chicago as well. But in LA, it's insignificant. In Chicago, cafes are more correlated with art galleries than in New York and LA. Cafes and sports bars are not likely to be in the same zip code. So as you see here, art galleries, the correlation with cafes is higher in Chicago than New York. In LA, it's quite low, and sports bar, cafe in Chicago is insignificant, whereas in New York and LA are more significant. So in LA, cafes are more spread out and scattered and not likely to be adjacent to other food or cultural amenities, except for the mall type of other amenities. Using the same comparison method, I looked at the change of cafes in US, France, and Korea. So whereas in US and Korea, cafes grow up, in France, it's actually declined because of smoking ban started in 2009. So that affected decrease of the customers in France, especially the small-scale cafes and coffee shops. Also, this shows the correlation with the scenes dimensions. So in US, transgression, ethnicity are two dimensions correlated, significantly correlated with cafes, whereas in France, cafes are correlated with the formality, which is country-specific to France. And across three countries, Bohemia, self-expression, and corporatism are all significantly positive with cafes. So this shows the city level of number of cafes. So as you see in Chicago, there are total 500 cafes. In Paris, about 1,400. In Seoul, 14,000 now. So it is 10 times larger than the number in Paris. So from public sphere into third page, I see the cafes work as a place for cultural innovation today. So this shows the distribution of cafes in three cities, and this is somewhat overlapping with the Bohemian map, but also it is different in terms of the density. This shows not just count, but density of cafes per 1,000 people. So in Seoul, as I showed you here, there is a big gap between Chicago, Paris, and Seoul. And what makes Seoul different from other two cities. So in the last 15 years, cafe market has skyrocketed and grown almost 20 times. There are more numbers of non-franchise coffee shops, like mom and pop type of coffee shops, versus Starbucks or like Caribou, these that kind of franchise. So one of the factors that affected this growth, dramatic growth of cafe is the separation of living and social place. So in the post-World War period, the country has gone through drastic modernization, and that also resulted in a change of lifestyle and as well as the architecture. 100 years ago, until 100 years ago, almost all buildings look like this, which had a courtyard in the middle. So courtyard was critical space for family and other community neighbors, because that was kind of a space for having conversation, having teas, and all kinds of different things in a daily life. And after World War and Korean War, we have this kind of high-rise apartment pretty much everywhere, except for a few areas. So 50% of the total household now live in the apartment. So half of the total household in the country. And 30% of the total household is a single person. So there is more number of single person household who is not married, who does not have kids, so like young professional who lives independently. So because of this change, cafe has become more third place that people can go to because this apartment does not provide socializing community space anymore. So cafe has become more popular third place. So according to survey conducted in 2016, 60% of patrons visit cafe more than 1 to 3 times a month, and 40% people go to cafe to socialize with family and friends and other colleagues. So there's still a function of sociability in cafe, not just using laptops or personal device, but people actually meet with others. They can do also like work together while they meet with other friends. So there are more number of experimental cafes nowadays, like pet cafe, like sheep cafe, gallery cafe, comic cafe, etc. So some popular neighborhoods like this, it used to be a traditional house village, and nowadays like independent artists and business owners came into develop their like small scale business like cafes and restaurants, which has become more eccentric and kind of interesting area because they still preserve this Korean traditional house, and they kind of renovate it inside to accommodate more contemporary program. So that's new type of cafes. So using the scenes dimensions, I categorize cafe scenes into 3 types. First is a bohemia, which is transgressive, artistic, social movement. Could be more about independent shop, not like Starbucks or coffee beans, but more independent local retails. Second type is a corporate utilitarian, which could be described in downtown, cafes in downtown. So we think of the federal offices, more franchises, corporates, hotels and fast food, more CBD type of area. Traditional local neighborly, so I did case study on Brownsville because they have communitarian culture, more family-based business and ethnic culture. So this shows more street scale view of these cafes. So the first type, Bohemian Cafe, is Wally's Book Cafe in Wicker Park. So it's actually hybrid of bookstore and cafe. So as you see in this picture, the space is very flexible. People can easily, circulate around these two programs, bookstore and the cafe. And there is, also interesting to see, especially at night, because they have this regular cultural events related to social movements like LGBT, feminism, environmentalism, those kind of things. So at night, people after they finish their work, they come to see the cultural events like this. And during the day, people go there to check out new books and also drink coffee while socializing. So as you see, cafe has more active and inviting storefront, and you can see more continuity of these transparent and active storefronts along the street. Also, when I went there, conversation he had was about like social life, family life, or even the movies and more cultural items. And they are in the form of traditional main street surrounded by other independent stores. Second type, corporate utilitarian, is Intelligentsia Coffee. It's Chicago-based coffee shop. It used to be not much franchise, but nowadays they become kind of franchise, but still it's not like a national franchise like Starbucks. So they are in different branches. This is one of them in Monana Building in downtown. So Monana Building was built in 19th century as the first Greek skyscraper for the office. So as you can see, their facade is very minimal, which was meant to be more practical for the office environment. So even the cafe has very minimized storefront. So this creates very, not very inactive, but minimalized relationship between the sidewalk and inside the cafe. Surrounded by offices, landmarks, and hotel, because it's in business district. Also, it is surrounded by more metro stops and bus stops, so it has more convenience to access different modes of transportation. And when it comes to the conversation customers have, and even the outfits, as you can see in the photo, there are a lot of office-related meetings, like casual meetings, and they talk about like projects and like business-related ideas. Also, on the other hand, there are a lot of tourists because this coffee shop is quite famous in the guidebook, the tourism guidebook. So it's one of the must-go places in Chicago. So there are a lot of tourists, carrying the maps and phones, checking out the hours of the art institute museum. So third type is in Bronxville. It's called the Sip and Savor. There is actually one in Hyde Park as well. So as you can see, it's very plain. There is another cafe right next to it. It's called Aintree Sweet Cafe. So the motto that they have is a place where coffee and community meet. So the owner is actively promoting the cafe space for Black entrepreneurship and youth engagement. So there is a sense of the Black culture and the civic movement, and this cafe is not too far from the murals that you see on this picture. So this culture is also described in many murals and institutions around this cafe. Also, inside this cafe, they display local artworks by community residents. Also, there are many historic landmarks. The Bronxville itself is a historic landmark district. So even buildings, there are a lot of landmark buildings. They are not actively being used nowadays because the population has decreased in Bronxville. One of the downsides is that there is still lack of retail amenities. Many areas are inactive during the night. So what is the relationship between these three types and the cafes? So I tested these variables on both the number of cafes and change of the cafes. So the result I see is that cafes tend to locate and grow in more bohemian and corporate utilitarian places. Cafes tend to be either in highly bohemian or highly corporate utilitarian places. Places with more art businesses and artists attract more cafes. It was positive in the change of cafes. Cafes are found and grow in place with higher education but lower median income. So I assume that there are places where young professionals tend to settle, and they have relatively lower income because they just started their career. So these places attract more cafes. And more walkable neighborhoods attract more cafes, like I did here. Walking bicycle and transit was positive. However, traditional neighborly and localism is negative in both the number and change of cafes. So cafes tend not to be in those areas. The number of cafes also negatively correlates with the change of cafes. So I think that means the place where cafes are already overly saturated, there's no more growth of cafes, so cafes are more growing in the areas where there are not enough numbers. So my recommendation for cultural placemaking: first, multifunctionality of cafe and other infrastructure. Of course, we like to go to cafe, but how about other programs mixed with cafes and retails, right? So it could be urban farm cafe, people can participate in urban agriculture and learn about environment. Also, pet cafe or more entertainment-based cafe. In Seoul, Culture Metro hybridized this metro station and art gallery together. So several stations are actually used for these free public art galleries inside the station. The second recommendation is the extension of the public space near Commercial Street. So Parklet, it started in San Francisco and now it's national. So it uses the curbside space, which is normally used for the parking. They temporarily changed this to sidewalk, and it could be an outdoor space for cafe, restaurants, and bike storage, all kinds of community-based activities. So according to Metropolitan Planning Council in Chicago, they did survey with these business owners who had this parklet temporarily, and they found about 20% of increase in their sales, and they also benefited walkability of the neighborhood. Also, we can transform street from the car traffic to more pedestrian traffic. In Chicago, we have Bike to Drive event for cycling events on Lakeshore Drive. There are car-free districts in Seoul, as well as other cities in Europe like Copenhagen and Paris. So this project was a city-driven, top-down project. Was considered to be one of the most successful city-driven projects in Korea. It used to be an elevated highway, and they demolished this to restore the river and the park. So they got ecological benefit as well as more retail business sales and also transit ridership around this area. My last recommendation is late night hour. So simply look at these two pictures in Ricoh Park and Intelligentsia in downtown. There is a clear contrast in pedestrian traffic because Ricoh Park, many stores are open until 9 or 10 p.m., even later. In Bush, many coffee shops and restaurants close at 5. So that creates clear difference in eyes on the street. So I think it's very critical to extend the pedestrian volume. So Nuit Blanche in Paris is a night event, and a night event that converts museum, streets, and even abandoned train stations into the art installations and performance stage. So these show different activities and more experimental type of arts on the streets overnight. So they collaborate with transit authority, metro transit authority in the city to provide extended hour for visitors. So yes, that's what I have. And any questions? Any questions?
Lisa, now I had said we had we only have one student presentation, so we do have a little more time for discussion now than I told you last night. It was my misunderstanding. So questions, comments are welcome.
We should make sure that the presenter is actually here.
Hey, do we have our presenter?
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
Oh, right, yeah, that's right.
So what was it? That's my great presentation. That was very fascinating and interesting. I enjoyed seeing the different places that you mentioned. So I have a really simple question first. What was the name of Oldenburg's book that you said that about the socializing living spaces?
It's called Great Good Place. Great Good Place. And the subtitle is the coffee shops, bars, like barber shops, and all hang out places. So it's a long name, but Great Good Place is the short.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I thought that concept of socialization was interesting. Have you ever considered sort of taking, sort of that Oldenburg route in terms of like how does Bohemia incorporate socialization? Would you say that like for your data, given the fact that like Bohemian has all these consequences like walkability and like more street activity for long periods of time and such? Could it be that it also generates different types of socialization?
So are you asking about the difference between Bohemian and third place type of communities?
Yeah.
Well, there could be commonality. Of course, like I said in the slides, Bohemian areas tend to have more community-based, but still artistic and kind of eccentric, transgressive services in their neighborhood. So definitely there is overlap between these third type places in the Bohemian area, but I think third place focused more on the proximity and the quantity of these places near your home, whereas Bohemian concept is more about the emergence of the culture. So I think there are, a little bit different approach, and the Bohemian is more about how these amenities create more different ways of life as opposed to conventional lifestyle, whereas the third place is more about physical attributes of these amenities. So that's
And I
in Chicago, but I still see one of the difference between the city of Chicago and Paris and Seoul, which is about how public transit, especially the station area, could be different. So in Chicago, many people talk about station being a very hot spot for crime, and not really the place for people to go there, right? Whereas in Paris and Seoul, it's more desirable because it's more surrounded by different activities and programs. So that was kind of the start of doing this research, and I was wondering what makes difference and why couldn't we that way. So that was kind of difference between cities. But inside the city of Chicago, when I look at the data and my experience, I think it's pretty intuitive. So far, I didn't see any common perspective inside the city.
I'd say the presence of HISUM really was to show the huge rise in the total number of cafes in Seoul, way more than New York or Paris or Chicago. And so that led us to ask really why. What has there been which has changed so much in Seoul to make these cafes and related activities so different and changing so fast? And so that is, I'd say that's been one of the, and we're still in the middle of this. It is, we have maybe 100 pages of draft discussing this and related issues. And the single most dramatic finding, or maybe I'm over-exaggerating, but one major finding was to compare the number of single, why don't you represent the result, because it's your finding.
You mean the family
Yeah,
structure?
the single person housing and how that has drastically changed in Korea, but not in the U.S.
Yes. So actually, I didn't show that in the slide, but let's say 20%, 30% of total household in Seoul is a single person. Yes, so 30% of total household is single person in Korea, which actually overnumbered that in U.S. So until I'll say 20 years ago, in Korea there are more family-based households, and within the last 2 decades it has been drastically changed, more westernized, but even more than in U.S. So in the U.S. There are more number of 3 or 4 people family households, whereas in Korea there are not many number that has 4 members of family in household. So 30% is actually higher than in U.S. It's in the U.S. I think it's only 20% or less than 20%. I don't recall the exact number, but it has been just skyrocketed within this several decades. So that is huge change.
So if we think of this not just for Seoul, but for what major parts of the world potentially, it's a classic, simple sociological variable. It's how integrated is the family. In Italy, people no longer, let's say, something like 20-30% of Italians believe in God and say that there's an afterlife and the like. But many, something like 60% of Italians go to church every weekend as a family. It is a family reinforcing event. They have pasta, they have a dinner, long dinners where there's lots of familial intensity. And so I'm choosing a Southern European example in contrast with the more Protestant Northern Europeans. So if we think of the world, the simple typology is the Max Weber, Northern European, Protestant style, more individualistic, more isolated, bowling alone, the Protestant ethic of Weber, that kind of model is different and was stressed by these authors in Southern Europe. those authors generally ignore Asia. Asia is now a major future area of the world. We need to bring in the Asian examples. I've told you, for over 30 years, I have had Chinese teaching assistants who keep teaching me things every year and so we ask, how and why is China and Asia different? So you saw that with Kiji last Wednesday. The coronavirus, the rise of nightlife overlaps with what Heeson presented here. The Parisians were doing nightlife, 30 years ago? Beijing is now planning lots of nightlife, but has not really implemented much at all compared to Paris, which really has had this highly organized public transit, metro, subways run at night, they have low-cost drinks in the street, all kinds of things which have made this a more visible active activity. So my point is, Seoul, if we try to bring Asia, and I would say many aspects in terms of this class, Latin America and Africa, let me back up. My three types: Protestant individualism in Northern Europe and the U.S., Australia, and New Zealand; Catholicism, stronger family, as in Italy, in Southern Europe; and third, Asia, much stronger family, traditionally, much more integration. Colleagues who I've worked with in Seoul, one colleague who was about 45 got married in his 40s, and his wife was also roughly 45. She was living with her family, and they had a curfew that she must be back by 10 o'clock every night, even though she was 45 years old. Okay, yesterday was International Women's Day. Korea did not have that kind of gender, that recognition of the young woman being alone. That is new in the last 20 years in Korea, and that is reflected in the numbers. So we don't really have the number presented as a change, but there's a doubling in Korea in the last 10 years of people living alone, which is to say, no longer is grandma or mother there to say, you be back here at 10 or 8 o'clock. So that is the tradition of the family supervising children closely, telling them what to do, where to work, what job to get. And then in the future, as they get older, the traditional role of the child, so children in Japan and Korea and Taiwan and China, China is a huge player, obviously. The Chinese family has been very strong. But Korea, I would say, is ahead of China. Even if this is now happening in China, it's happening more, it's newer in China. Korea, in this sense, is, say, maybe 20 years ahead of China. But both of them, for instance, both in China and Korea, there was no discussion of gays or homosexuals, whatever, LGBTQ, none of that 20 years ago. I was in so Richard, Florida has used gays in the U.S. as an indicator of tolerance and innovation and bohemianism and so forth. We were at a conference in Seoul maybe 10 or so years ago, 10 to 15 years ago, with the mayor of Seoul, with international and Korean experts discussing economic development, rise of population. Seoul is a massive city. It's 4 times bigger than New York. And so it's one of these great world cities like Mexico City, Shanghai. It's a huge city. Half the Korean population live in Seoul. But it is drastically changing very fast in ways that are harbingers, I'm suggesting, for China. So Chinese pay attention. And so you see, so just to link my, sorry, let me finish my gay anecdote. 15 years ago, Richard, Florida asked, how are gays treated here in Seoul? The answer was, well, there was a famous television anchorman who came out as gay. He was fired. He tried to get another job for 2 years. He could get no work, so he committed suicide. That was the public image of gays 15 years ago in Seoul. Today, what do we have in Seoul in terms of LGBTQ and so forth?
The perception for the LGBT has also drastically changed in Korea because of more individualism and westernization. So there is a big rally and protest in the city hall, in front of the city hall, for those groups who support the LGBT rights and kind of civic movement. And traditionally, the city hall has been very kind of conservative and old. The building city hall was built during the Japanese rule. So it has a lot of symbolic meaning as to remind people of kind of power, so it's interesting seeing because those people tend to have more social movement and activities in front of City Hall Plaza, and on the other side there is a group that represent the church, and they still resist.
We have one person at least here who's been actively studying evangelical churches in Brazil, and evangelical churches are spreading in Africa and Latin America, among Mexican immigrants here. But who is spreading evangelical religion? American fundamentalists were leaders, but they today, the U.S. per capita has far fewer evangelical figures than Korea. Korea is the #1 country in the world in sending out evangelicals to places like Brazil, Africa, and so forth. So that there are huge numbers of Koreans engaged in active proselytizing. Join the Baptist Church. Join our storefront. And there's a politicization which is analogous to what's happening in Brazil. But Korea has been doing this for longer, and it has gone further, and it has more impact. So I'm suggesting for Latin America and China, there are big implications of what we've heard here, of the dramatic rise in politicization, of the LGBTQ, the gay movement. And so just to finish my anecdote, I should turn to the Chinese and ask, but doesn't that example, even say in terms of China, how does that example strike you in terms of the changes in China in terms of public discussion of gays? So let me ask any of our Chinese judges on this. That is, I'm asking, how has there been a visible public change in the recognition and discussion of gay lifestyle in China in the last 15 years? Was it closer to Korea 15 years ago? And how visible is this now? And I'm asking you, where and how much visible this, because I'm using this as a striking example of bohemianism. And how much visible change do you see in China? So we've got at least 2, 3, 4 smart Chinese observers who can comment and answer that question. Who wants to speak about that? Tenji is here. Most of you don't know him, but why don't you briefly introduce yourself and tell them a little bit about how you know things like this.
Okay, so I'm a third-year PhD student in sociology, and I work on professional sport in China, and I was an math graduate student here, and I did political sociology, which is something political. And back to the question, as I mentioned, I definitely see, well, there is like an isomorphic change within China regarding the LGBTQ trend. However, I guess my biggest concern is how the isomorphic change has been embedded within the local Chinese political/social context. And regarding that, I think the major differences regarding the LGBTQ community in China is about the authoritarian government and how the government responds to the potential social activism proposed by all these groups. groups. And so far, I think there's somehow like tension going on between the groups and between the state. And I think the state somehow takes a very sort of like how to say that? It's more, the state is more like, as long as you cannot, the LGBTQ community does not challenge the government directly, the state will just let it go without actually interfering of the community. However, once it somehow like there's a social movement of people try to get together, try to protest something, otherwise the state probably just crack down all the movement by using state forces or like something.
One example that Chinese students told me, but let me ask the rest of you if you've had this same experience. When I asked this kind of question maybe 5 years ago, and Chinese students, 5, 6 years, would say, for example, we never would talk about or gossip or have online social media discussions of leading figures, basketball players, people in the Communist Party, large, famous media figures. That is, sort of nationally, visibly important, successful people were sort of gossiped about as being gay. And it was sort of, wow, we've got lots of high-level important gays in China in ways that was apparently virtually never discussed 10, 20, 30 years ago in the past. Would you agree with that? I mean that I'm giving you sort of a simple, qualitative bit of evidence which came from one person's assessment. So we're not doing an international survey, but we're asking smart informants in this room if my example from Chinese, this is not one, this is multiple Chinese students who told me that same kind of thing. Would your perspective, especially you've lived in big and small cities, you've lived in Beijing and in villages, you've traveled, you've lived in the West and in China, you see the differences, and we've heard of the discussions of changes over time. Any other contextual qualifications? So one big difference, of course, is the more authoritarian national government. But even within the authoritarian national government, to have social media say, he's a member of the Central Committee of the Communist Party, and he's gay, and so is he gay. I mean that, in a sense, it's not to say that I'm against the Communist Party, but it's to say he's one of us if we're gay, for instance. I mean, is not that quite new in China?
I think I agree with you. And there's another point I would say is just about thanks to the development of technology, there are a lot of homosexual dating apps now, and it's just very much public. It has been somehow publicized. As long as you have access to the internet, you have your mobile device, you can basically just download the app and people can do whatever they want to do. And somehow it's easier and no one can try to protest against that.
Any other comments on these trends about, say, potential rise? Eastman's PhD thesis was really on many aspects of Bohemia and how different definitions influence bicycling, public transit, reduced automobile use, etc. So on. But I'm trying to make the point that this is not just Korea. But Korea is an interesting. It's been widely seen. The Korean, for instance, soap opera. There's the popular music, rock, hip hop. This kind of thing is widely followed around Asia. So Korea is the most important example for this kind of popular culture. The new sort of being, dans le vent, as the French say, or head of the crowd, doing things first. The Koreans are often seen as doing that in Asia. People talk about the Koreans are the Italians of Asia, where Japan is the Germany of Asia. So if we simplify that way, Korea may be doing things which are critically important for China in the future and which are already happening in China now, but there are big implications of this which Eason has pointed to, and I'm suggesting they are not uniquely and specifically Korean, but these are more general processes maybe how about Brazil? In terms of the implications of, that is, the Bohemians on the one hand, which we almost also link to the new political culture, but then the new populist leaders in Brazil, in Trump, in the Brexit vote, we're having an anti-Bohemian, anti-coronavirus preparation visibly debated by him going on in a reaction to coronavirus right now in terms of Trump versus, that is, so I'm pointing simply to that these are critical, global, local dynamics going on, which are sharpened by the global comparisons and the extreme and the big variations from city to city and neighborhood to neighborhood within the cities in ways which Houston has very powerfully illustrated with both qualitative and quantitative within city as well as national data. So she's done far more work than most PhDs. And okay, so but anybody want to follow up with any other interpretation, say of the rise elements of, and well let me add as well. I then started maybe 10 years ago talking to Asians and asking, what's the role of Bohemia in Asia? And then Seoko, and this is the background of the book called Tokyo Karaoke. Seoko Kim was here, he did it from Korea. He did a PhD where he showed Korean citizens participate at higher levels than Americans in civic groups, but churches are number one, and they're mainly evangelical churches. They proselytize and travel internationally, they're very engaged, and they're more politically conservative. On the other hand, you have others which are, and so this is the Brazilian scenario which you've heard, has a lot of resemblances to domestic Korean politics and over these kinds of issues. So I'm linking things which are happening later in other countries to aspects of which are there now in Korea. To ask maybe anyone else from China who wants to comment on any aspects of these changes which may be there. Sorry, I didn't make the intro point. You know it from Kentucky Karaoke, which is if you ask the Koreans or the Japanese or the Chinese, you've got lots of economic growth. You've got lots of you're doing things brilliantly in many ways. Is this being driven by Bohemians in ways that Richard Florida and Jane Jacobs have talked about in Greenwich Village and Death and Life of Great American Cities? And people say, what's Bohemia? Never heard of it. Bohemia is not an Asian concept. It comes from Paris. Then it got to Greenwich Village after World War I, but it was not, that is, the integrated family where you don't want to upset grandma was the norm until 10 or 15 years ago. Now you've got more people moving out, living alone, and living more individualistic, independent lives in ways, but they do not have, to the same degree, the Bohemian model as we do in the West. So where and how is it? So I'm saying, as Hee-Sun said, her definition of Bohemia includes separate elements, and she played down, she called it one dimension, the unusual dress. Red hair, green hair, blue hair, strong clothes that say, I am different, I'm challenging the establishment. That's a more Northern European tradition. You did not see that in Italy, Spain, southern France, and so forth. And you saw it much, there was a little bit in Asia, but the point is the family has retarded that kind of development in Asia more than with Northern European as the other extreme. But this is now changing, but how much and in what, but I'm not suggesting that everybody is following one path. The background traditions of what is the family. So the Italians maybe they no longer believe in God very much, but they love they love being together as a family. And they do many more things than the Northern Europeans do individually. So in that sense, we've got, I'm not saying, as you hear me say, we've got differences by city, by country, by age cohort. There are big changes going on in the world, but interpreting them and recognizing how this may be happening universally nevertheless implies some potential country and local differences. Comment.
I definitely agree with your point. I mean, like family has been traditionally such an important institution in China, and we see that because I think there's a huge generational gap in terms of especially perceptions of gayness, which is a new issue in China for the past decade or so, and definitely the phenomenon of moving out from your families and living alone is increasing in China, and we see that sort of more social media oriented discussions on gay, lesbian. These are proliferating more and more, but not on mainstream media, not on these more traditional authoritative medias.
Okay. Excellent.
But I've heard from from discussion from one of my peers here in Chicago that there's some gay or lesbian members in China, because they have a lot of pressure from their families for them to go to family and find a couple, and then they're hesitant to reveal their identities as gay, so their friends, their lesbian or gay friends would come and pretend to be their girlfriend or boyfriends, even though they're not. So I mean, that kind of activity still exists, but it just showcases how sort of family still plays a very dominant role, despite the fact that we're seeing these new changes in sort of subculture discussions on that.
Excellent additional points. Any other quick comments on China, and then we need to let our student presenter. Yes.
Yeah, I agree with the description, Tony. I also saw many examples around my life. I saw one very smart journalist working in Chicago, and he said that he had been adrift in here for 4 years, never going back to China because his parents are, still not accepting him as, coming out of the closet, and but he recently went back to China. I guess he, make up this relationship with the families. But he came from very educated family. I mean, his parents are at least college graduates. But there are lots of rural areas where kids would leave the family to work in the big cities, and before they leave, even their hairstyle, their clothes are judged by their grandparents. Like you cannot wear like a hooligan, or you cannot you wear baggy, with a reverse bell shape of the trousers. But after they spend a year or two working in Guangzhou, the places where there's an emerging market of hairdressing. I mean, these people they learn that there are different hairdressing. Some are quite Asian, some very European or American. They started to follow suit, and when they come back to their hometown, their parents couldn't even recognize them. So and also for gay and lesbian communities, it's basically a niche for them. I mean, the city provides a niche.
Flash the camera on yourself for a little bit so the viewers will see the voice of this.
It's hard to do that, but
Of this
okay. I think in China there is a subculture in there, particularly from the city where I spent 10 years, Chengdu. There are lots of gay bars in there, and it seems like in China, Chengdu might be the top tier city that is friendly to gays and all these people. And I guess several years ago, there was a very famous club in Chengdu that tried to expand its influence by integrating some AIDS prevention strategy into the community so as to be more acceptable by the local parties. I mean, they try to co-opt this message from the party so they can make them more legitimate. So they never try to show their pride in their community or something like that. They just use all these tactics to expand their influence while maintaining its legitimacy in the eyes of the grandparents generation. So yeah, I guess it's still in the closet. I guess there are some famous some celebrities coming out, not because of themselves wanting to, but because they trade their wives because they found someone else, and this is reported by the news media. So this happened a lot. I don't think there are a lot of people coming out in China because they want to. Usually just paparazzis, scooping some news.
Okay, these are all excellent, subtle comments and elaborations of the general main idea which Easton has given us. So let's, we need to have, time is going on. But can you come forward and give us your presentation, and we'll thank you.
I don't want to keep anyone, so I'll go through this very fast. But I'm doing my presentation on electronic monitoring in Cook County. This is for my BA thesis. I'm majoring in public policy and geography, and so I'm doing my thesis on ankle bracelets and how that affects people's just how that affects people who are on it. And so I'm looking at is electronic monitoring an effective form of prison reform, and also how does the rise in electronic monitoring, what does that mean for our society and for our geopolitical landscape? And so the reason I'm looking at this is because on Cook County's website, they call electronic monitoring a community-based alternative to incarceration concept. And just from the organizing work that I've done in Chicago, I've heard very opposite things about what electronic monitoring is. So I wanted to figure out what, I wanted to do a study to understand more thoroughly what people's experiences on it were. And so electronic monitoring has dramatically increased in our country. So this says from 2005 to 2015, it's increased by 140%. So you can imagine in 2020, it's increased by even more. And so while the number of people in Cook County Jail is going down, the number of people on electronic monitoring is going up. So we can see that there's a shift now from just putting people in jail to having people on EM. And so electronic monitoring, you can be on it by pretrial detention, probation, or parole. And there's 3 departments that run it. It's the IDOC, which runs the parole version of it, the Cook County Sheriff, which does pretrial detention and probation, and the Illinois Department of Juvenile Justice, which does it for juveniles. And then there's about over 2,000 people on EM via the county system, and over 2,000 people via IDOC. And so, very quickly, my literature. This is just some of the points. It's a lot longer. I started off by looking at Foucault's disciplinary society and how we become docile bodies, and then Deleuze talks about societies of control and that how through technology our disciplinary society is changing. And then Brooks talks about how electronic monitoring is basically a culmination of our societies of control, which uses technology to, so basically by that it means that nowadays we have our, so basically Foucault was talking about how institutions run our disciplinary society, and what Deleuze talks about is that we no longer need institutions to discipline us because now we have technology and because of that we're capable of being disciplined everywhere. So people use the example of like working from home, for example. Like now, now like when you go home, you have to answer emails, you have to do all different types of things. So yeah, so, sorry, I'm moving through this very fast. And then there's also partial citizenship, which talks about how due to technology and policing, that due to technology and policing, we basically there's the creation of the carceral citizen, which is anybody that interacts with the criminal justice system automatically enters into a new citizenship, which means that their rights, basically as like regular citizens, are being erased, and technology helps this. And then so there's also the criticisms of EM. People say that it's good because it reduces the number of people in prison. It's a lot low cost than regular incarceration, but also people criticize it because they say it violates people's civil liberties, it's very arbitrary, the devices don't work, and it's also not in Cook County, but in a lot of places, like you have to pay to put yourself on electronic monitoring. And so for my methodology, this is a pretty much qualitative thesis, and I've interviewed 15 people trying to get more in, hopefully by the time my thesis is due. And so that's just an overview of all the people I interviewed. And so I'm dividing my thesis into 3 parts, which talks about electronic monitoring, the effect on the family. And so people talked about how it hurt the relationship with their family, because not only are you under surveillance, but your family becomes under surveillance as well, because parole officers are able to basically come into your home at any time, and they also call your home all the time. And so people talked about how their home becoming like very vulnerable to like police surveillance really harmed the relationship with their families. People also talked about privacy, the lack of privacy, the lack of freedom, the vulnerability to police as well. But also, like, some people mentioned that they were able to learn patience and grow within themselves by being home all day. And then also people in their community talked about isolation. They talked about transitioning, how that was made so much worse by being on EM, and basically the stigma of wearing the ankle bracelet and how people view it. And so I also did a survey, and the survey results weren't as helpful as the interviews, mostly because when I asked people questions about their experiences, they were like, it was terrible, it was awful, but when they actually did the survey, they were like, it was all right, or they would say like it was slightly negative as opposed to like what was shown in the interview, so I didn't really know how to interpret that. But basically, I found out that with a lot of studies on EM that talk about it reduces recidivism, what people don't take into account is like how much networks matter in terms of how easy transitioning is. And so a lot of people talked about how it wasn't being on EM that helped them transition, it was rather the fact that they had a strong familiar and friendship network, which was able to do things for them when they were on EM. And then a lot of people, it's applied very arbitrarily, which I found was true. There was no there's no type of system in place to like decide who gets put on EM and for how long. Like I called the city, I called IBOC, and they were like, we don't have any information on that. It's really disruptive, so people mentioned that it's really hard to get a job or to like or to participate in community programs. Their experiences were also very dependent on their relationship with their parole officer, and like also it harms marginalized groups the most, because for a lot of people you're very restricted in your movement. So you can imagine with a majority of people who are on it are African American and who don't come from neighborhoods with a lot of resources, so you can imagine how difficult things like shopping and getting a haircut and just doing everyday things are when you're on electronic monitoring. And also, like, I interviewed some people who were convicted of sex crimes and who were also on EM, and they talked about how basically with parole and pretrial, there's an end to it, but if you're convicted of a sex crime, there's no end in sight. Like you're on it for the rest of your life. And they talked also about what it feels like to constantly be under surveillance and what does that mean for rehabilitation and things like that. And then so obviously like a big part of my thesis is talking about surveillance. And to relate it to our class, I think it's important to think about how when we talk about our new society or our new political culture, we have to think about it. It influences every part of our lifestyle, and that includes criminal justice. And so thinking about how the rise in technology has allowed new forms of incarceration to exist. So I said, yes, it is really important because it is more efficient than like prisons or jails in that it's a lot cheaper and you get to put a lot more people on it, but it's not an alternative to incarceration. It's rather an adaptation of our carceral system that because electronic monitoring, again, it's low cost, you can put a lot of people on it. You don't have to house people, you don't have to feed people, they have to house, they have to feed themselves. It also talks a lot about privatization because a lot of the companies who run it are private companies. And then also thinking about how we're surveilling groups of people. So in Cook County, I didn't have the map here because I'm not done making it, but I have a map of basically the zip codes in which the most people are on electronic monitoring. So you have places like Inglewood, places like Auburn, Russia, which are highly African American, and you can imagine like you're basically, you have information, a bunch of data on the movements of like largely African American males in the city. And so you can imagine that this idea of surveillance really influences our criminal justice system and minority groups as well. And so I have to do also policy recommendations, and I'm still thinking about them, but it's going to be something about abolition and about how we need to get rid of our criminal, and our current criminal justice system is terrible and it's punitive and it's not rehabilitative. But that's a very, yeah, that's the end of it.
Any quick question or comment? And this is very original. I mean, striking. It's important. The specific electronic part is also, I point out, this is the top of an iceberg. That is, there's much more surveillance of people who've had some kind of run-in with the criminal justice system, the police, etc. There are thousands and thousands of people who've had something which has led them to be on parole, even if not followed every minute with an electronic device on you. So the crime rates and the number of people in jails has dropped enormously in the last 10 or 20 years. In most of the U.S., crime is down as measured by many things. On the other hand, there's a lot more surveillance, much more than just 2,000 people in Chicago, who feel that they are being watched and checked up on and so forth. And so these are bigger issues of a sense of surveillance, of control, of civil rights of individuals. And so they're clearly, it's a dramatic, interesting policy and intervention, new, important to explore for others. And just getting some basic descriptive information is very helpful.